Morning YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Sunday the 13th of December, preparing for the final Outsiders and the final first Moondog for 2015.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy and you're not.
And this morning, to pick through 2015, we have Jane Gilmore, editor of Women's Agenda, Chris Berg, senior research fellow, Institute of Public Affairs, Tricia Jar, policy analyst at the Centre for Independent Studies, and Toby Ralph, marketing strategist. Welcome all.
Thank you.
What a year it's been. And today, of course, extraordinary news from Paris.
I see that the reaction is positive. I see no objections. The Paris Agreement is adopted.
There we go. There's the world fixed. That's somebody translating.
It's going to be very quiet.
Yes. Well done. Nothing to see here. A cooler world. Look, the world will soon be filled with analysis of what took place in Paris overnight, but there appears to be a unanimous agreement that there should be a unanimous agreement. And for that, we should all be glad. Moving right along, we asked our outsiders to pick two stories, or actually one story, because we're running out of time, that resonated with them. Jane, you were first cab off the rank, which is tremendously exciting. And you bade us consider the government, or the former government's attacks on the Human Rights Commissioner, Gillian Triggs.
Well, actually, I think the whole topic, it spreads its way all the way across 2015. Because then you're also looking at the difference between the way she dealt with the Abbott government and the difference and how she's now dealing with Malcolm Turnbull.
Let's listen back.
The fact is, Mr. Chairman, that by not later than the middle part of January, I had lost confidence in Professor Triggs as President of the Human Rights Commission.
Amazing attack from government on one of their key statutory office holders.
I didn't find it amazing at all. I thought it was entirely typical of the Abbott government, which was just a knee-jerk reaction to anything they didn't want to hear or that didn't fit into ideology of saying, well, that's not true and that's a political attack. And also the very idea that anybody could politicize child abuse, which was apparently their first thought. That was the first place they went, and their complete misreading of the entire nation. If the most xenophobic of people are still going to draw a bit of a line at child abuse.
And Chris, it's interesting because so much has changed, and that kind of culture war conflict seems to be a thing of, well, it seems so 2015 now.
Yeah, such a long time ago. Look, I think this was indicative of a strategic decision by the Abbott government to focus on specific areas where you could find individuals or institutions that you wanted to target for political reasons. Now, I think there were legitimate questions to be asked about the Human Rights Commission's timing of its report, because it was clearly it was shifted to avoid the 2013 election, and it was timed, whether accidentally or implicitly or deliberately, to target more of the coalition government. I think those were legitimate questions, but it fell very, very flat when it happened because, exactly as Jane says, you end up using allegations of child abuse or allegations of abuse in detention centres as a political football to go against a statutory office holder. Nothing wrong with attacking statutory office holders, but it looked shocking, and it looked a very, very bad move strategically for the Abbott government.
Now, you have picked as your key story for the year was the government's unwavering commitment to economic growth. Have a listen to this.
Joe Hockey, thanks for your time.
Good to be with you, Brian. Good evening.
Congratulations on the G20.
Thank you. It was a triumph, wasn't it? Went very well.
What do you think came out of the G20?
Growth, Brian. Growth was the key message that went in and came out of the G20.
Yeah, but there were other messages, weren't
there? There were, but growth was the main one. It was an economic forum, Brian. Growth was the message.
Yeah, but you didn't expect other countries to sort of decrease the size of their
No, Brian. The point I'm making is that there were a number of distractions, and it was good that growth cut through.
Distractions from what?
From growth, Brian.
This would be the thing, Chris.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to talk about. This is a setup. No, look. So the growth issue. To speak about growth for a moment, growth is very important. Now, the growth issue that we have in 2015 is a escalating series of predictions that we are entering a lower growth era. So everything that happens in 2015, 2016, happened in 2014, will be viewed in the long term as part of a trajectory of growth, because ultimately everything that we rely on, all our living standards require a increasing growth increases. We're now looking at around 2 to 2.5% of growth, whereas previously we might have been out for 3 or even 4% growth per annum. If we have that declining growth, and if we have declining living standards as a consequence, it's going to have ricochets across the political system. It's going to have ricochets across all the things that we care about in politics. So health and welfare and education and so forth.
And the wonderful news, Toby, late in the year is we've come up with a scheme which is pretty much taxing our way to growth, which I think is very exciting.
I'm all for it. I think we should pay everything we have. The good thing about growth for me, I think there's a global growth story. Actually, I think the world is actually getting so much better. Poverty's declined by 80% in 40 years. Child mortality is down 2/3. Human lifespan's growing 5 hours a day, has been for 50 years.
We could live forever at
we
that
could,
rate.
we could. I fully intend to. I've been checking my contract fairly thoroughly. Farms are more productive. Every generation's 9 IQ points stronger, living in the most peaceful time ever on our planet. I think there's a great broader growth story going on at the moment. There's a nice Christmas message.
I feel better already for all of that.
I went really dark and you've gone, hey, good times, everyone. Have a drink.
Tricia, welcome. And you've chosen, jobs for families, and that was something introduced in the 2015 budget that Scott Morrison, PM Tony Abbott, that thought this was entirely fair and reasonable. Let's have a listen.
We've got around 45,000 people who, under this change, will get slightly less paid parental leave, and there's around 34,000 who won't get the paid parental leave from the government because they're already getting it from their employer.
Patricia, they will live forever. That's the compensating factor.
Well, I think the more interesting thing here was what happened with the trade-off between family tax benefits and childcare. So, as most of us know, the original proposal in the 2015 budget was to pay for the extra $3.5 billion needed to fund the new fancy revamped childcare package by cuts to family tax benefit Part B. Now, the most recent government's proposals have shifted that balance a bit, so they've reduced some of the changes to family tax benefit Part B and so on. But I think the fundamental issue was that the family tax benefit Part B was it was a payment designed to recognise the stay-at-home mother. And I think now, after so many years of, the mummy wars about, what does it mean to be a good mother? What does the government think? Why should we recognise this, that, and the other? So much of that was happening during the Howard years and even to an extent during the Rudd and Gillard years. Now I think we can say that the mummy wars have been won and that working mums have won.
Sorry, Tricia, go on.
Yeah, so I think it's just interesting in the sense that government policy now very favourably in terms of what kind of tax treatment, what kind of transfer treatment they receive, working families are now much better treated than those who might be single earner couple families. And I don't have a view on that one way or the other, but I think it's interesting to note that has, I think, been decisively settled in 2015.
See, it's an interesting thing, Jane. I mean, mummy wars, culture wars, we're kind of moving to can I use the Paul Kelly S word? something of a settlement?
Well, no, I don't think we have. While we're still calling childcare a mummy issue, then no, we haven't, because childcare is not a mummy issue, it's a parents issue. And while we've still got the gender pay gap and the superannuation gap that we've got, while we're still talking about childcare and family tax benefit as a women's issue, then no, we're not anywhere near settlement on it.
I'm back in my box.
Jonathan, just for a different perspective, I don't like your children and I don't want to pay for them. There we are.
There is a T-shirt.
Well, my children are uniquely problematic. That's
Now, Toby, you have chosen, I think this was clearly the key political moment of 2015, which was the seamless transfer of power.
I hardly noticed. And I don't think our former Prime Minister did either. Taking it very well.
We have a little bit of audio to accompany this idea.
It's a very strong team, and one of the
reasons why so many members of the team are able to perform so well is because they've got a very good captain. It takes a good captain to help all the players of a team to excel.
Tricia, I wonder if you could just explain for us a moment, quickly, the concept of cognitive dissonance.
I wasn't sure whether he was talking about something cricket related or whether he was actually talking about himself, because it just seems that the gap between perception and reality is just so big there.
Yes, oh, the self-belief is strong in that one, Toby.
Yes, the force is indeed. It is.
Look, that's a bit unfair compared to Malcolm Turnbull. So,
Well,
yeah,
he's not
the
alone.
humble, modest Prime Minister that we have now.
He's self-effacing, meek. Yes.
But it's all changed. It's changed, and the country seems happier for it. Only a couple of people, probably Peter Credlin and Tony Abbott, who are not pleased, according to the polls.
I don't know if it's so much happier as just that feeling when the dentist stops drilling.
Yes, we've had our root therapy.
It could be an interesting symbolic moment, because I think the original sin of the last couple of years, the last 6 or 7 years, has been the spill from Rudd to Gillard. That set off a chain reaction in the political class. It set off a series of instability, and the hope is, and this may be hope against experience, but the hope is that perhaps the transfer of power from Abbott to Turnbull slows down the political system, makes the public happier and calmer with political leadership at the very least, so that we can have at least a few more years of stable government. Maybe we'll never be able to replicate the stability of the Howard years or the Hawke years or something like that.
Maybe that's not so bad, but
no,
something...
I don't have a problem with instability, because sometimes that's good. If there is instability in a democratic system, that probably shows that the people aren't that happy with the leaders in power.
I wonder, Tricia, if what this shows though is some sort of capacity of the system to self-correct. That, you know, we talk a lot about broken politics and all that stuff, but we have an example maybe in the demise of Abbott of, you know, when something isn't working, that things change, and for the better.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been one of those people who's thought that whole broken politics, oh, democracy is broken stuff, was always, you know, a bit of an exaggeration. But I guess what I'm really excited to see is how history, you know, maybe 20, 30, 40 years down the track, views kind of other leadership transitions. So, you know, Hawke to Keating versus Abbott to Turnbull, especially given that I think Turnbull and Keating have so many kind of similar personality issues. I mean, like, they were always...
That's very good.
I mean,
a similar love of clocks.
Well, I mean, in the sense that, you know, they're both very, very sure of their greatness, but also in the sense that they were both kind of sitting there bubbling away while their leaders, you know, rabbited on in front. But I think that's something that will be really interesting to see. And I'm a big fan of arrogant prime ministers. I have a Keating fridge magnet.
It tends to go with the job. And Toby, as we move now into the Sixth Republic, I mean, let's cast forward a little here into this year to come. I mean, does it really hold the sort of promise that we're kind of feeling? Is it?
I think it's going to be a good year. I do. I mean, now we've knocked off climate change. That's completely off the agenda now. We'll do gay marriage early after the election. That'll be finished. And I don't know, growth. Chris has got that under control. And I don't think that. And the mummy wars
to be
finished.
done, really.
We just have to deal with a couple of troublesome terrorists, and I think we're fixed.
What's on your list, Jane?
For next year, I would like to add to Toby's list. Perhaps we could do something about Manus Island and Nauru. Maybe just something a little bit of not torturing people would be a nice thing.
I think would help our sense of national self-esteem. Chris, do you have any wish lists?
Look, I think that the challenge for Malcolm Turnbull is much larger than has been suggested. Tony Abbott was responsible for a lot of his own demise, but he wasn't responsible for everything by any stretch of the imagination. And I think the fiscal crisis is going to be a really big one. Malcolm Turnbull is going to make enemies, and he's going to alienate sections of the community when he tries to deal with that. So
there is work to be done. Tricia, a quick thought from you?
I think the worst thing is that he won't be able to deal with it. And I think at that point we'll have to deal with what Chris was saying earlier about, you know, low growth being the new normal and what that means for our political system, what it means for what we expect of politicians. If we're all feeling poorer, then what does that mean for the way our politics are going to shift?
We'll have to learn to love going backwards. That's the answer. Look, thank you, everybody. And look, that'll be good for the world and good for the climate.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Here endeth the outsiders.